Don't you dare! You don't get to say it and then leave! You finish that sentence, Tae-Joon.
His blood was warm and her hands were not enough. That was the whole world for a moment, narrowed down to that single useless fact. Asha Mensah knelt on the cold concrete of the parking garage with both hands pressed over the hole in Han Tae-Joon's side, pushing like she could hold his life inside his body by force of will, and it kept coming anyway, dark and certain, between her fingers. He'd turned them in the last half-second. He'd put his own body where hers had been. And now the most dangerous man she'd ever known was going gray in her lap while the words he'd been about to say died in his throat. "Don't you dare," she heard herself say. "You don't get to say it and then leave. You finish that sentence, Tae-Joon. You hear me? You live and you finish it." Sera was already on the phone, and the voice coming out of her now was nothing like the cold second-in-command Asha had feared for 3 weeks. It was clipped, federal, certain. She was giving an address, a code, a medical priority, the language of a woman who had a whole machine standing behind her that no one in this building had ever known about. "Hands stay where they are," Sera ordered, pressing her own over Asha's. "Harder. He doesn't get to bleed out on this floor. Not after 6 years. Not tonight." Behind them, somewhere up the ramp, tires shrieked. Wright was gone. He'd fired into the dark and vanished into it, and the man who'd taken the bullet meant for Asha was the only one paying for it. Marcus Wright did not run because he was afraid. Marcus Wright ran because a man who has just shot the wrong person in front of a federal agent understands, instantly and without panic, that the clean version of the evening is over and the clean-up version has begun. He'd aimed for the witness. He'd hit the obstacle. And as his car climbed out of the dark and into the rain-slick street, he was already, calmly, deciding which loose threads to cut first. The bookkeeper who now owned half his prize. The friend who knew her secrets. And the brother, 2 cities away, who had always been the easiest lever of all. They came fast, the way only people with serious money or serious government behind them can make medics come, and they peeled Asha's hands off his body and put their own there instead. She fought to stay close. They let her ride. And in the back of that screaming vehicle, with the city smearing past in the windows and a stranger's hands keeping Tae-Joon alive, Asha finally understood that the secret she'd been protecting for 3 years no longer mattered at all next to the simple unbearable question of whether he would open his eyes again. They took him through a set of doors Asha wasn't allowed past, and the doors swung shut, and just like that the most powerful man in the city was a body on a table that strangers would decide the fate of. She stood in the corridor in a blood-dark gold gown, a woman who owned half an empire and could not buy the one thing she wanted, and for the first time in 3 years she had absolutely nothing left to manage. So she did the only thing left. She waited. Hours passed in that flat, cruel hospital time that doesn't move. And somewhere in the middle of it, Sera Kim sat down beside her, still in her torn gown, and finally told her the truth she'd been carrying for 6 years. "6 years ago they put me inside," Sera said quietly, staring at the closed doors. "A joint task force. The mandate was Marcus Wright, not Tae-Joon. Wright launders through a dozen men like Tae-Joon across 4 countries, and the only way to reach him was to get close to one of his targets and wait for the money to move. I got close to Tae-Joon." A pause, heavy and bitter. "I did not plan to start respecting the man I was sent to help bury." Asha turned to look at her. "You've been protecting him." "I've been protecting the case." Tae-Joon was supposed to be a stepping stone. Instead he became a man who never once did the thing I needed him to do to close it. He's a criminal, Asha. He's also the cleanest criminal I've ever met, and I've spent 6 years failing to hate him. Her jaw tightened. "And tonight you stood up in front of 40 witnesses and tied yourself legally to the whole structure. You didn't just save yourself. You made yourself the center of my case and Wright's target list in the same breath. It landed on Asha slowly, the full shape of it. She had walked into that gala carrying a clever document and walked out as the single most important name in 2 different wars. Wright needed her dead so she couldn't testify. Sera needed her alive and talking so the case could close. And Tae-Joon, behind those doors, needed her to simply still be standing when he woke up, if he woke up at all. There's something you don't know about me, Asha said, very low. And if I'm the center of all of this now, you need to know it. Because they already do. Sera went still. Say it. I didn't take that job for the money. 3 years ago my younger brother borrowed from the kind of people who own men like Tae-Joon. I took the job to work the debt off quietly and get him clear. Her voice didn't shake, which surprised her. Wright's people found out. They came to my friend's apartment. They said if I help Tae-Joon, my brother stops being a name and becomes a body. Sera didn't recoil. Sera did something far more frightening. She nodded slowly, like a woman fitting the last piece into a puzzle she'd been working for years. That's why Wright moved now, she said. He didn't just have a buyer's interest in Tae-Joon's empire. He had you. A bookkeeper with a secret is a bookkeeper he could turn or break whenever he needed to. He's been holding your brother as insurance since before you ever found that entry. She exhaled. Which means your brother is the one piece on this board Wright still controls. And the second he realizes you've told me, that boy's clock starts running. Asha was on her feet before Sera finished. Then we don't have ours. Where is he? Can your people find him? My people, Sera said carefully, are currently very angry that their 6-year operation got detonated at a charity gala. But yes. They can find him. The question is whether you're willing to do the one thing that gets them to move fast. Before Asha could answer, the doors opened, and a surgeon came out pulling down a mask, and Asha stopped breathing entirely. He's alive, the surgeon said. The round missed the major vessels by a margin I'd call lucky if I believed in luck. He lost a great deal of blood. He's not awake, and the next 12 hours decide everything. But he's alive. Asha's knees went. Sera caught her elbow. And in the middle of the relief crashing through her like a wave, Asha understood that 12 hours was exactly the window Wright needed, and that she could not afford to spend it sitting in a chair waiting for a man to open his eyes. She had a brother on a clock. And the only people who could save him needed something from her first. They let her sit with him once he was stable, in a quiet room with the dawn coming up gray and gold over the city he half owned. She held his hand and it was cool and heavy and unresponsive, and she leaned close to his ear and said the things she had been too much of a coward to say while he could hear it. I came to you under a lie, she whispered. 3 years of it. And you took a bullet for me anyway. So you're going to wake up, and I'm going to tell you the whole truth to your face, and you're going to be furious, and I am going to let you be, because you will be alive to feel it. That's the deal. Those are the terms. Wake up and hate me if you have to. Just wake up. His hand didn't move. But the monitor beside him kept its slow steady rhythm, and she chose to take that as an answer. Listen, if you've been holding your breath since the first part, sitting in this hospital room with Asha while a man fights to stay in the world, do one quiet thing for her. Hit subscribe. Not as an order, but because every subscriber is the only way this channel knows that stories told this carefully, with this much heart, are reaching the people who need them. It's the entire reason these keep being made. So if you need to know whether he opens his eyes, stay with her, and subscribe before the next door opens. The price of moving fast had a name, and the name was a deposition. Sera drove her to a federal field office before the sun was fully up, and in a cold glass room with a recorder running, Asha did the thing that severed her last tie to the woman who had walked into that tower to quit. She told them everything. The ledgers. The forged entry. The shell accounts she'd traced to Wright. Daniel Cho's slip about the date. Every number she'd memorized in 3 years of pretending not to understand. She handed the federal government the case against Marcus Wright that Sera had spent 6 years unable to close. And in exchange, she asked for exactly one thing. "You find my brother first," Asha said to the room. "Before you move on Wright, before you move on anyone, you get him out. That's the condition. Everything I know, all of it, the second he's safe and not 1 minute before." The agent across the table didn't like it. Sera, leaning against the glass, did something that surprised them both. She backed Asha. "Wright's holding the boy as leverage on her," Sera said. "Which means the boy is also the one place Wright has to keep men he can't afford to move. You want Wright? The brother isn't a side errand. The brother is the thread that leads to the room Wright thinks is secret." She looked at Asha. "Find him, and we find a door into Wright nobody's supposed to know about." It took the task force 9 hours and a phone Wright's people had been careless with. The brother, whose name was Kojo and who had spent 3 weeks not knowing his sister had bargained her whole life to keep him breathing, was being held in a derelict factory on the industrial edge of the city. 2 men on him. A third checking in by phone at intervals. Asha was not supposed to be there for it. Asha made it extremely clear that she would be there for it. And Sera, who understood by now that this particular woman did not respond well to being managed, simply put her in the second vehicle and told her to stay in it, knowing full well she wouldn't. But first, a call that turned Asha's blood to ice. Nadia wasn't answering. Asha had been ringing her since the deposition, and Nadia, who answered on the first ring at 3 in the morning, who had never once let an Asha call go, was silent. When the task force sent a unit to her apartment, they found the door open, the lamp knocked sideways, a chair on its back, and the framed photo of Asha and Nadia at university lying face down on the floor. Wright had understood the moment Asha went to the federal building. And he had reached for the lever he always reached for. Asha's people. The ones she loved. "He has Nadia," Asha said into the dark of the vehicle, her voice cracking down the middle. "He took her because I went to you. This is on me. I did this." "No." Sera's voice came back hard. "Wright did this. You finally fought back, and a man who's spent his life winning is panicking for the first time. Panicking men make mistakes. He grabbed your friend because he's out of clean moves, and a man out of clean moves is a man we can finally catch." She looked at Asha in the dim light. "But I won't lie to you. He's holding 2 people you love in 2 places now. And we can only hit one of them clean. The choice sat between them in the dark, monstrous and impossible. The brother, found, a known location, a clean entry. Or Nadia, just taken, location unknown, the trail still warm. The choice resolved itself from an unexpected direction. Because somewhere across the city, Daniel Cho was having the worst night of his life. Daniel had walked into that gala expecting to watch Tae-Joon fall. Instead he'd watched a bookkeeper turn his own forgery into a weapon, watched his boss get shot by the American he'd sold his soul to, and realized with sickening clarity that Marcus Wright did not keep partners. Wright kept tools, and used tools, and threw tools away. Daniel had spent 2 years believing he was Wright's associate. He understood now that he had only ever been another loose thread, and that the cleanup had already begun. So Daniel did the one thing a cornered traitor can do. He picked up his phone, and he called the person he'd betrayed. "Don't hang up," Daniel said fast, before Asha could. "I know what you think of me and you're right about all of it. But Wright's cleaning house and I'm on the list, which means right now you and I want the same thing, which is that man in a cell or a grave." His voice was high with fear. "I can give you Wright. His routes, his accounts, the dock where he moves people he wants to disappear. And I can tell you he just had 2 people brought there tonight. A boy. And a woman with braids. Asha's whole body went cold and still. One location. Both of them. Wright had made the task force's impossible choice for them by being arrogant enough to put both his levers in the same room. "Why would I believe a word from you?" she said. "Because," Daniel said, and for once there was nothing false in it, "I helped him build the cage. I know exactly where the door is. And I would rather hand it to the woman who beat me than die in it next to the people I helped put there. It could have been a trap inside a trap." Sera said so plainly. A desperate traitor handing them a location was exactly the kind of gift you examined for teeth. But the task force watched the dock for 2 hours and saw the things Daniel had promised they'd see: Wright's vehicles, Wright's men, and a low warehouse at the water's edge with the lights of a place holding people who weren't supposed to leave. It was real. Daniel, for the first time in his life, had told the truth, because the truth was the only currency he had left to buy his survival. And Marcus Wright, who had spent the whole game certain he was the most patient man in any room, had made the one mistake patient men make when they finally panic. He'd gathered everything that could hurt him into a single place, so he could destroy it all at once. The raid went at the coldest hour before dawn. Sera led it, because 6 years of being inside meant she knew how Wright's men moved better than anyone wearing a badge. Asha was ordered, twice, in writing, to stay in the vehicle. Asha lasted exactly until she heard the first shout from inside the warehouse and a voice she'd have known anywhere, Nadia's voice, sharp with fear, calling a name. After that no order in any language was going to hold her. If you're still in this with Asha, still holding on while she runs toward the people she loves through the dark, prove you're here. Drop the single emoji that matches your heartbeat right now, this second. And tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are, because I want to know exactly who's standing in this dark dock with her. And if you're watching on your TV, reach over and tap that like so I know you're in the room with us. She came through a side door into the holding area and the world resolved into a single bare bulb, a cleared stretch of filthy concrete, and 2 faces she would have walked through fire for. Kojo, her brother, thinner than she remembered, his wrists bound, his eyes finding hers with a disbelief that broke her heart. And Nadia, beside him, bruised at the cheekbone, fierce even in fear, who saw Asha and shouted a warning instead of crying out for help. "Asha, behind you." Asha turned. One of Wright's men had peeled away from the chaos at the front and come for the most valuable target in the building, which was her, and he was close, and there was no time to be afraid in any useful way. What happened next she would replay for the rest of her life as a blur of 3 sounds. Nadia screaming. A sharp command in Sera's voice from the dark. And the flat hard crack of Sera doing the job she'd trained 6 years to do, dropping out of the shadows between Asha and the man with the cold certainty of someone who had been waiting her whole assignment for permission to stop pretending. The man went down. Asha was still standing. And the dock, all at once, filled with the sounds of a raid going exactly the way Sera had planned it. She got to her brother and she cut him loose and she held him so hard he wheezed, 3 years of fear and bargaining and silence collapsing all at once into the simple animal relief of his heartbeat against hers. Nadia folded into them, and for one moment in that filthy factory the 3 of them were just people who loved each other, alive, together, breathing the same air. But Marcus Wright was not in the building. Asha realized at the same moment Sera did. The dock had Wright's men, Wright's vehicles, Wright's cage. It did not have Wright. The most patient man in any room had done the patient thing one final time. He had sent everything that could hurt him into a trap, and then he had not been standing in it. Where Wright should have been there was only an empty chair, a whiskey still cold sweating in its glass, and a cigar burning itself out in a tin lid. He'd been here. He'd watched his men set the cage. And he'd walked out a back way minutes before the raid, leaving his people and his hostages to absorb the blow while he slipped through the one gap nobody had thought to close. He knew, Sera said quietly, staring at the chair. He knew the dock was compromised. Which means someone told him. Her eyes went hard. Daniel gave us the location. And Daniel gave Wright the warning. He played both ends to make sure that whoever won tonight, he'd have a friend in the aftermath. They picked Daniel up an hour later, exactly where he'd told them he'd be, which was its own kind of confession. He didn't run. A man who has hedged every bet doesn't run, because running commits you to one side, and Daniel had spent his whole life refusing to commit to anything but his own survival. I gave you the dock, he said from the back of the vehicle, almost wounded. I gave you the boy and the woman. You got them out. That's real. You also warned Wright, Sera said. I gave everyone something, Daniel said, with the awful honesty of a man who genuinely could not see the problem. That's how you live. You make sure that whoever's standing at the end, you handed them a gift. He shrugged, cuffs and all. Wright's gone. You'll spend months chasing him. And when you finally corner him, you'll remember that I'm the only man alive who knows how he thinks. I'm not your prisoner. I'm your next informant. You just don't know it yet. Tae-Joon woke on the second day, into pale light and the antiseptic quiet of the recovery suite, and the first word out of his ruined throat was her name. Not Sera's. Not a question about the Empire. Her name. Asha came in from the corridor still wearing 2 days of exhaustion and the dried memory of his blood under her nails, and she stood at the foot of his bed, and she did the thing she'd promised his unconscious body she would do. She told him the truth. All of it. Her brother. The debt. The real reason she'd walked into his world 3 years ago. The lie she'd lived in every single day she'd worked his books and let him think she was simply an honest woman with a gift for numbers. She waited for the cold to come down over his face. She waited for the betrayal to land, for him to become the enemy she'd feared he would the moment he knew. He'd taken a bullet for a woman he thought was honest. Now he knew she'd come to him wrapped in a lie, and she braced for the whole thing to curdle. It didn't. I knew, Tae-Joon said. Asha went very still. What? Not the details. But 3 years ago a woman with no debt of her own took a job managing the books of a man like me, and she was too careful, too watchful, too good at not asking questions. A faint exhausted ghost of a smile. Nobody takes a job like mine for the salary, Asha. I knew you came in carrying something. I let you. Because every day you stayed, you became less a woman with a reason and more just a woman I couldn't stop watching. His hand turned over on the blanket, palm up. I didn't take that bullet for an honest bookkeeper. I took it for you. I always knew exactly who I was protecting. But the truth between them cut both ways, and Asha made herself say the rest of it. There's the matter of what I own now, she said quietly. Half of everything you built. On paper. Legally. The clause did exactly what I designed it to do, and I can't undo it, even if I wanted to. The federal case Sera's building names your whole structure. When the dust settles, half of an empire under investigation belongs to me, and the man it used to belong to is lying in a hospital bed. Tae-Joon was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke there was something almost amused in his exhaustion. You walked in to quit, he said softly, and you walked out my partner, my protector, and the legal owner of half my life. Most people who try to take what's mine end up in the river. His thumb moved over her knuckles. You're the first one I've ever wanted to hand it to. The question, Asha, is whether you want a kingdom that comes with a federal investigation, a missing man who wants you dead, and me. Marcus Wright did not flee the country, which is what everyone expected him to do. Wright did something far more dangerous. He went quiet, and he went patient, and from a borrowed high office somewhere in the city he began, calmly, to rebuild his understanding of the board. He had lost the hostages. He had lost the doc. He had lost Daniel, who would sell him to the federal government the way he'd sold everyone. But Wright had spent his whole life understanding one thing better than any man alive: every empire has a single point of failure, and Tae-Joon's was no longer the books, or the partner, or even the man himself. It was the woman who now owned half of it. And a woman who owns half of something is also, by the same legal thread, the one person who can sign all of it away. He didn't need to kill her anymore. Killing her now, with her deposition already on a federal record, would only martyr a witness whose testimony was already locked. No. Wright had moved past the crude solution. He understood now that the most elegant way to take everything was not to remove Asha Mensah from the board at all. It was to make her sign it to him willingly. And Marcus Wright had just learned the one thing in the world Asha would trade anything to protect, the one lever stronger than her brother, stronger than Nadia, stronger than her own life. A man in a hospital bed with half an empire and a federal target on his back, who had just told her he wanted to hand her the kingdom. For 3 days, things were almost calm. Kojo was safe, death erased the moment the man who held it got shot in a parking garage. Nadia was bruised but fierce and alive, already making Asha laugh again in the cruel bright way that only old friends can. Tae-Joon was healing, slowly, surrounded by people Sera had personally vetted. The federal case was building. Daniel was talking. It felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, like the worst had passed. Asha should have known better. In her world, calm was just the space a patient man left before he moved. On the 4th day a plain cream envelope arrived at the hospital with Asha's name on it in a hand she didn't recognize. No stamp. Hand delivered. Inside was a single card, and on the card, in careful black ink, were 2 lines that stopped her heart. The first line was an address she didn't know. The second was a sentence she would never forget. You own half of his world. I'm offering to let you keep all of him. Come alone and we'll discuss the price. Bring anyone, and the man in the bed develops a complication no doctor will catch in time. It was unsigned. It didn't need a signature. Asha knew exactly who left whiskey cooling in an empty chair and walked out the back of his own trap. She stood at the window a long time. She thought about Sera, who would tell her this was exactly how Wright operated and that walking into it alone was suicide. She thought about Tae-Joon, healing in a bed 30 feet away, who would tear his stitches getting up to stop her if he knew. She thought about her brother, finally free. She thought about every person Wright had taught her he could reach. And she understood that the woman who'd walked into that tower 3 weeks ago to quit would never have considered this. That woman wanted out. But that woman didn't exist anymore. The woman standing at this window owned half an empire, had handed the federal government a kingpin, and had knelt on cold concrete holding a man's life inside his body with her bare hands. That woman did not run from Marcus Wright. That woman went to meet him. She went to Tae-Joon's room while he slept. She didn't wake him. She stood in the doorway and looked at the man who'd known her secret for 3 years and protected her anyway, who'd taken a bullet rather than let the world take her, and she made him a silent promise she wasn't sure she could keep. She would not let Marcus Wright touch a single thing she loved again. Even if the only way to stop him was to walk into his trap with her eyes open and outthink the most patient man either of them had ever met, on his own ground, alone. She left the card on her own bed where Sera would eventually find it, because some part of her knew that walking in completely alone was how people died, and some other part of her could not risk the complication the card had promised. It was a coward's compromise and a brave woman's gamble at the same time. She left no note. She took the address. And she walked out of the hospital into the dark. The address led her to a high glass office in a tower not unlike the one where this had all begun, which she understood was deliberate. Wright wanted her to feel the symmetry. She'd started this 3 weeks ago alone in a records room finding a number that was wrong. She would, perhaps, end it alone in an office finding out the price of everyone she loved. She rode the elevator up alone. She walked the dark corridor alone. And she pushed open the door to the office at the top, where a single lamp burned gold against the cold city, and Marcus Wright was waiting for her exactly as he'd promised, calm, patient, 2 glasses already poured. "You came alone," Wright said, sliding a glass toward the empty chair. "I confess I'm impressed. I half expected your agent friend to come through the ceiling." He studied her with something like genuine appreciation. "Sit. You and I are the only 2 people in this entire affair who understand what things are actually worth. Everyone else is running on feeling. We can do business." Asha did not sit. "You said there was a price. Name it." "A signature." Wright tapped a thick document waiting on the glass. "You sign your half of the empire over to a holding company I control, quietly, before the federal case freezes it all. In exchange, the man in the hospital never develops his complication, your brother stays free, your friend stays whole, and you walk away genuinely wealthy and genuinely safe. I get my prize the elegant way. You keep everyone you love alive." He smiled. "It's the best offer anyone in your position has ever received." Asha looked at the document for a long moment. Then she did the thing Wright did not expect, because Wright had spent the whole game believing she was a frightened bookkeeper who'd gotten lucky with a clever clause. She laughed. Quietly, almost kindly. "You spent 2 years building a plan around making people afraid," she said. "My brother. Nadia. Tae-Joon. You think fear is the strongest lever in the world because it's the only one you've ever pulled." She slid the document an inch back toward him. "But here's what you missed, Mr. Wright. I already gave a federal agent every account number you've ever touched. The case doesn't freeze my half of the empire. It freezes yours. So you didn't bring me here to buy my signature. You brought me here because you're already cornered, and I'm the only person who walked into this affair with nothing left to lose and everything already on the record." She leaned in. "You're not offering me a deal. You're asking me for a way out. And I came alone tonight to tell you to your face that there isn't one." For the first time since Asha had laid eyes on him, Marcus Wright stopped smiling. The calm cracked, and beneath it was something uglier and far more honest, the fury of a man who has built his entire identity on being the most patient person in every room and has just been outweighed by a woman he'd written off as prey. "You think a recording closes me," he said, rising. "You think your agent and her paperwork can hold a man with my reach. I have walked out of more cages than you have ever seen, Miss Mensah. The only difference tonight is that now I know precisely how little you're willing to lose to stop me, and that makes you something I can finally calculate." His voice dropped. "You came alone. You told me yourself there's no deal. So you've just informed me that the simplest version of this evening is the one where you don't leave this office at all." "That's the part you got wrong," Asha said softly. "I said I came alone. I never said I came unwired." The office door opened, and Sera Kim walked in with her badge out and her people behind her, and the cold calm on her face was the calm of a woman who had waited 6 years for exactly this and had just gotten every word of it on a clean recording. Asha had left that card on her own bed deliberately. She had walked in alone deliberately. And she had spent the entire conversation guiding the most patient man in the city into saying, out loud, on tape, the one thing 6 years of surveillance had never managed to make him say. A threat. A confession. His own voice, naming the price and the consequence, in a room full of federal microphones Asha had carried in for him. They took Marcus Wright in his own borrowed office, beneath the cold skyline, with the whiskey still untouched on the glass desk between 2 chairs. He didn't shout. Men like Wright don't. He simply looked at Asha with a long, assessing stare, the look of a man recalculating everything he thought he'd known about the woman in front of him, and said one quiet sentence as they walked him out. "You're going to be very good at this," he said. "God help the people who underestimate you the way I did." And then he was gone, through the door, into the machine Sera had spent 6 years building for him. The most patient man in the city, finally out of time. When the room had emptied, Asha and Sera stood at the glass together looking out at the cold city, two women who had started as suspect and spy and become something harder to name. "You played him," Sera said, almost wondering. "You walked into his trap and turned it into mine. 6 years I couldn't make that man say a single actionable word. You did it in 10 minutes. "I had an advantage you didn't," Asha said. "He thought I was prey. You he always respected. Me he underestimated right up until the door opened." She watched the city. "It turns out underestimation is the one weapon nobody can take from you." Sera looked at her for a long moment. "Tae-Joon's empire is finished, you understand. The case takes it apart. Whatever you own half of by morning is going to be evidence." A pause. "You ended up with nothing but the title." "No," Asha said quietly. "I ended up with my brother. My friend. And a man who's going to be very surprised to learn I left the hospital." A faint tired smile. "That's not nothing. That might be everything." She went back to the hospital as the sky was going pale, and Tae-Joon was awake, and he had clearly been awake long enough to have learned exactly where she'd been, because the look on his face was the look of a man who had spent 2 hours unable to chase her and had hated every second of it. "You walked into Marcus Wright's office," he said, "alone." "Wired," she corrected, sitting on the edge of his bed. "And it worked. He's gone, Tae-Joon. The case is yours to lose now, not his. It's over." He caught her hand and held it like he could keep her from doing anything that brave ever again by simple grip strength. 3 years, he said roughly, "and I finally get to say it to you, clear-eyed, both of us alive, no bullet in the way." His thumb moved over her knuckles. "Asha Mensah. From the day you walked into my records room and refused to be afraid of me, I have been completely and helplessly in love with you. There. I said it before something else could go wrong." She kissed him then, finally, carefully, mindful of the bandages, 3 years of held breath releasing all at once in the pale dawn light. For one perfect suspended moment everything that had tried to destroy them was gone, and there was only the two of them, alive, honest at last, in a quiet room above a city that had nearly taken everything. It should have been the end. After everything, they had earned an ending. But this is not a story about people who get to stop fighting. And as Asha pulled back from that kiss, her phone, face down on the bedside table, lit up with a message from an unknown number. She picked it up. She read it. And the warmth drained out of her face so fast that Tae-Joon was already trying to sit up, already reaching for her, already asking what was wrong. The message was 4 lines long. The first line was a photograph, Marcus Wright, in handcuffs, being walked into a federal building, taken from across the street only an hour ago. The second line read, "He worked for me. You took an employee. You have not met the owner." The third line was Asha's brother's full name, his new safe address, the one only the federal program was supposed to know, and the time he'd arrived there that morning. And the fourth line was the part that stopped Asha's heart cold in her chest. "You own half of an empire, Miss Mensah. So do I. The other half. And I think it's time the two owners finally met." Asha Mensah had spent 3 weeks believing Marcus Wright was the top of the chain. She had handed him to the federal government. She had outthought the most patient man in the city in his own office and walked out alive. She had finally heard the word she'd waited 3 years for. And in the space of a single message, she learned the truth that turned every victory to ash. Wright had never been the owner. Wright had been an employee. The real power behind everything, the patient hand that had let Wright spend 2 years gutting Tae-Joon's empire, had been watching the whole time, waiting to see which of the players left standing was worth dealing with directly. And that hand had just decided it was her. So whose face waits at the end of that message? Who owns the other half of a world Asha thought she understood? And how do you fight an enemy who let you win, just to see if you were worth the trouble of destroying? That answer lives in part 3. If your heart just dropped through the floor, if you cannot accept that the man you thought was the villain was only ever the help, then go to the comments right now and demand part 3. Tell me you need to know who the real owner is. Because I will not release it until this channel is begging for it.